Welcome, everyone, to the Culinary Now podcast. I'm Matt Britt.
And I'm Jaime Schick.
And today on the pod, we are very fortunate to be joined by Julianne Stelmaszyk, who is the Director of Food Policy for the state of Rhode Island. Julie, thank you so much for taking the time. How are you?
I'm doing great. Thanks so much for having me.
Well, we are so excited to have you on the pod today. And I want to start with kind of about your career path and how you got to where you are today, because it is fairly unique. And I'd like for you to share how you ended up there, because I know you started and you have some chef experience. So can you tell us a little bit about that?
Sure. Yeah. My journey, I think, I never knew I would go down this path when I first got interested in the food world. But I quickly realized that my body could only take working on farms and in kitchens for so long. And so I'm lucky to be able to have found a path that I could really bring those together. So I grew up in South Jersey. It was, Jersey gets a bad rap, I think, but South Jersey's a lot of farmland. And so we had farms all around us. I had a vegetable garden, but I never really thought about where food came from or that it even mattered. And I had the opportunity to go to my undergrad in Boston. And I thought I wanted to be an architect, and I quickly realized that was not going to be the path for me. But what was really transformative for me is the summer of my freshman year, I had the opportunity to study international food policy in Rome, which is the hub of all the UN food agencies, which is kind of like a post-World War II agreement. So, Food and Agriculture Organization, World Food Program, these types of organizations that are really looking at a global scale and long-term food security and sustainability. So I came back to Boston and I was undecided, and I said, well, I need to do something. And so I started to go to the farmer's market, and I started to connect with my very hyper-local food system. And that set me on a really interesting path of really looking at local food systems, farming and food. I ended up starting to work for the farm that I was a customer at. For another story, I ended up meeting my husband there. So, you can meet people anywhere in any square possible. So I worked at the farmer's market, I worked at the farm, and I ended up finding environmental science actually as my path, because at the time my school didn't have a food policy or food systems program like Johnson & Wales has today. It's so exciting to see these types of programs available now to young people. So anyway, I really focused in on kind of the environmental and social impacts of our food system in my studies. And I later had the opportunity after I graduated to go and work in kitchens in Rome. I applied to this program called the Rome Sustainable Food Project that was started by Alice Waters maybe 15 years ago at the American Academy. And it was this, at the time, kind of an innovative model that brought together local food systems. We had a garden on the property. We engaged with suppliers, and I got really interested in like moving up the supply chain a little and saying, okay, well, there's all these farms growing local food, but like, why is it so hard to get it on the menus? Why don't you always see it in the supermarkets? And I really wanted to understand that supply side. Anyway, I ended up staying. I stayed in Rome for many more years. I started a cooking school, so I got kind of more into education. I did food tours at the farmers markets. And then I ended up volunteering, and then I got hired full time by an international high school in Rome where, ironically, the food was terrible. You wouldn't think, but it was really bad. They had frozen everything. Nothing was local, lots of processed foods. And so I got hired to try to change that, which was definitely harder than I thought. It was a food service management company, which can do great things, nothing against them, but it just was so much more complicated than I realized. So I learned a lot about institutional procurement. We started a school garden. We integrated it into the curriculum, a lot around food literacy. And it opened my world to this like farm to institution space that I didn't even know about. And that's this opportunity for leveraging the buying power of large institutional buyers like healthcare, hospitals, colleges, universities, correctional facilities, and looking at how you can shift those dollars towards more values-based food sources, because they're big volumes, and so anyway, after that, I ended up moving back to the US and moved back to Boston. And I came across this awesome opportunity at Boston College, where they were hiring for a new sustainability role to launch a local and sustainable food program that was focused on both like the back of house side of things and looking at procurement and sourcing and working with the chefs and more plant-based menus, but also front of house. And how do you shift diets? How do you get students to try Acadian redfish or monkfish? And the key is, don't tell them what it is, just put it in a taco and make it taste good. So, so I think, I like to say that I've worked in so many different parts of the supply chain. I'm sure like many of us, I've also worked in restaurants and cafes. And so this great opportunity came up in Rhode Island to really take what I was doing at BC at a larger scale and looking at a geographic region, like a state, little Rhode Island, 1 million people. And what can you do to really shift towards more equitable and sustainable food systems at that scale? And so that's my story.
Wow, that is amazing. It's so interesting. And one thing you're saying, what you're doing now. So now you're the director of Rhode Island Food Strategy. Can you talk about what your day-to-day kind of looks like? What exactly are you doing in this role? Because many people might not be familiar with what you're involved in.
Yeah, it's a great question. And I always get asked, people look at me kind of sideways when I say what do you do? And I think that's because it's kind of a new and emerging space. I think Rhode Island is we were the first in the nation to have a role like this that's really bringing together food systems across these different silos. And so my predecessor worked with the former Raimondo administration in 2017 to really launch our food strategy. And it sets a vision that brings together 3 pillars of economic development, health equity, and environmental sustainability, and works to address those through a food systems lens, or using food as a tool to address some of these social, environmental, and economic issues. So what do I do? Well, I work to accelerate that program and implement those strategies. We have all these different goals set out by the state around local sourcing and food access and food waste. And so I spend a lot of time really convening stakeholders, building relationships with different organizations and partners. I also do a lot of business development and support, so helping small businesses get access to capital or technical assistance, or finding the right partners that are part of that ecosystem. And then I also spend time working with some of the agencies that I work for on advising on different food system issues and policies, regulations. I can give an example. So Rhode Island, the General Assembly last year passed a law allowing for cottage food, or essentially like making things like baked goods, cookies, and
in your home, right?
Pastries in your home. Yeah, exactly. So, I've been working with the Department of Health and the Department of Business Regulations on making sure that we have all the facts straight and can really get that word out to small food entrepreneurs so that they're aware of it and can follow the rules and be safe and all that good stuff.
Julie, it's so interesting because I didn't know that Rhode Island was the first to have this sort of position. It's like, dare you say, almost like a food czar, right? It's like someone who's really just tasked with overseeing all these different sort of facets. But I do know that since its creation, a lot of states are taking similar approaches. So I think that that's a credit to not only, your work, your predecessor, but also the state of Rhode Island, just once again leading the way from one of the smallest states perspective. It's like, but one thing I'll say I didn't know as well as about you is that you originally were designed to be an architect. And I heard you say earlier that really wasn't sort of the approach you ended up in, but I actually think that it is, because I think you have to take that sort of mindset in all you do. Like, you are sort of crafting these sort of elaborate like plans. And I know just from your bio and your history and knowing you that, your role is actually, it lives within 3 different larger buckets of the state, commerce, health, and the environment. And as a chef, I can put together where food touches those, But I think one thing I'd love you to talk a little bit more on or dive deeper is the policy side, because we have students that like could be rock stars in the policy world, but I don't know if they know what that looks like. How much of your
Mhm.
job touches writing or implementing policy?
Yeah, I appreciate that, and it's a great way to think about it. I think with the architecture piece, because it's really about bringing together like the more creative side of things, what with some of that hard, the infrastructure design, kind of left side, right side brain. So it's a lot of time is just spent like problem solving, like what's the issue, why, what's at stake, and how do we move past this? And I think that is where policy comes in, because policy is really about changing the rules, right? It's changing the game, and it's complicated, and there's politics that's part of policy. And there's lots of different ways to address policy. A policy doesn't always have to be legislation, right? It could be um, a, a set of priorities that an agency follows, right? Or it could be certain programs that we decide to spend time or resources on. It doesn't always have to be a bill, but sometimes it is. And so um, I am not doing any of the writing of the legislation. There's experts that know how to write the bills. They're very complicated and detailed. Um, but I work with Governor McKee's administration, and specifically through Commerce and Department of Environmental Management and RIDO. And so we all kind of collaborate on identifying what are some of the priorities. And some of the ways that takes shape is through something that actually was written into legislation about 10 years ago. It's called IFNPAC, which is the Interagency Food, Nutrition, and Policy Advisory Council, a great acronym, very memorable. And it brings together these 8 state agencies to work through some of the issues that might be regulatory or policy, and examine what are the things that we can do with our existing tools and programs and resources, and then also looking at things that aren't in legislation that we might consider in the future. So that's one mechanism that happens. I know we've discussed things like school meals. We've looked at food waste issues. We've looked at local food economy and what are the ways that we can track and implement programs that support more local purchasing across the state. So, so those are some of the ways that I support that, is by convening and bringing together the right partners and making sure that we get input from the right people, because the last thing you want to do is put forward some sort of legislation or policy that has no teeth, right? There's lots of things that can go through that say, oh, this would be great. That's wonderful. Let's get it in. But then there's no funding or support to back it up. And so I have found that there's more success when you actually have that combination of, changing the rules or setting the tone while also having resources allocated to implement whatever the program is.
Well, you had mentioned local and local products, and I know that you're working in Rhode Island, you live there. I lived there for a short period of time, so I'm sure that you feel that connectivity to local food products and local sourcing. Do you think this is because the state of Rhode Island is so small, or do you think Rhode Island is just doing things right?
Well, I'm biased, so I have to say we're doing things right. But I think, I'm a big fan of place-based solutions. I think that there's a lot we can learn from universal programs and policies and values, but we have to look at right sizing that to the place where we are. Rhode Island is the ocean state. We have amazing resources at hand. We have this incredible 400-mile coastline. We've got this location in a multi-trillion-dollar economic corridor, but we don't have a lot of farmland, as does Maine or Iowa, right? So we need to look at some of our strengths. And I think one of the reasons that like the local foodie scene has been so strong in Rhode Island is because there's so much pride in that place. Even though Rhode Island has its different, areas that people don't always go over to, if you're down in Westerly, you might not spend a lot of time over in the East Bay because it's far away. And as a non-native Rhode Islander, I've definitely learned that people tend to stay, in your local community. And there's pros and cons to that. But I think one of the pros is there's a lot of pride. Rhode Islanders like to support other Rhode Islanders. And so I think something like local food has really resonated. And of course, we have, Johnson and Wales, as you guys are pumping out chefs left and right, so many amazing restaurants all over Providence and the state and even the region. So I think we're lucky in that sense where we just have this right kind of ecosystem.
That's awesome.
To go a little, so I want to shift a little bit to more of the actual food strategy, because I feel like it's impressive. And if you look at the documents, I know like it's under basically the framework of Relish Roadie, right?
Yes.
And if you look at those plans, it seems so much like a no-brainer. But like clearly there are people in the world, even perhaps locally outside Rhode Island, that aren't doing this well. We're doing it better theoretically. Can you talk a little bit about the actual strategy? Does it still capitalize on like certain priorities, as you mentioned earlier? Like how are you framing your work? You touched on a lot of stuff, but can you dive a little bit deeper into that?
In how we're framing it, yeah. So I guess like Relish Roadie came out in 2017, and it was always a 5-year plan, and it's interesting that you asked that at this time because we're in the middle of laying out our hopes for renewing this plan. And we'd really like to set our eye on a 2030 vision, which aligns really well with some of the regional goals around the New England food vision and others that Rhode Island participates in and we can align with. I would say in terms of how we structure it, I think it just depends on the environment around us, and we try to tackle things as we can. So certain things will emerge as like the right time and place and people at the table to get something done. And so an example of that would be seafood wastewater. So this has been an ongoing issue for years. Rhode Island lands a lot of calamari, squid, but we also land a lot of other species. And for years now, the challenge has been that a lot of it, most of it, is actually frozen and shipped overseas to be processed because other countries abroad have lower environmental regulations and cheaper labor. And what's crazy is sometimes it's shipped back to us and then we're eating it. So you might be eating Rhode Island squid, but it made a trip around the world. So this is just one specific example that's emerged. And we had an opportunity to put forward a grant proposal through a federal grant to try to address this issue. So, that opportunity came up and we seized on it. And so what I would say is we try to step forward with when the time is right and the stakeholders are there and there seems to be momentum behind something, then we move on it. But the strategy overall, there's kind of 5 focus areas, like in terms of framing it. I can list them off really quickly. It's about increasing food security or ensuring all Rhode Islanders have access to healthy and fresh food. It's about promoting local food and supporting food and beverage businesses and getting access to markets. And then it's also looking at preserving and protecting farmland and fisheries, as well as diverting food waste from the landfill. So those are the kind of broad focus areas. And then within that, there's so many different priorities. And I would say it's a network of partners that are making this happen, both within the state agencies, as well as our partners like the Rhode Island Food Policy Council and many others across the state. So the role that I play really is trying to identify like what are the tools that we have at our disposal now at this moment, and how can we try to move the needle on some of the strategies that we've outlined. And it really depends on the environment that we're in and what type of support there is from, the stakeholders in the state.
So you'd mentioned that one of your first priorities was ensuring that all Rhode Islanders have access to fresh food. Do you find that Rhode Island has a lot of food deserts? And if so, what are some strategies you're using to kind of combat that, or making sure that they do have the access to the fresh food?
It's actually it's unfortunately become worse over the last few years. There's the pandemic and global supply chain disruptions. Unfortunately, we're still dealing with. Inflation, of course, is impacting lower income communities. And on Monday, actually, or next week, there's a state of hunger that town hall that will come out by the Rhode Island Community Food Bank that will share some of the updates at this moment. It's still a really big problem. I think we've made some strides with really wonderful programs that are effective, like the SNAP bonus bucks. So this has been something that a lot of states have. Rhode Island has, I think we call it bonus bucks. It's a healthy incentive program administered by Farm Fresh Rhode Island. And what it does is it takes SNAP, Supplementary Nutrition Assistance Program benefits, SNAP benefits that are federal. And it says, okay, well, if you buy local fruit and vegetables at these vendors, at these farmers markets, then you'll have $2 to spend on those products instead of $1. So it doubles the purchasing power of SNAP recipients to buy local fruits and vegetables. And there's actually been legislation that was passed by the General Assembly last year on expanding that to not just local, but all fruits and vegetables, which is really exciting. So, there's programs like that I think we have yet to see some of the full benefits, at least of that one I just mentioned. But it is challenging. And something that often comes up is transportation, right? So someone might be able to afford the food that is, they can order online, for instance, but they might not be able to get there, right? So those are some of the challenges sometimes. And I think we have to be careful about saying a food desert, because I think it makes it seem like there's no, it's barren and there's no resources there, but that's often not the case. There's really wonderful organizations like Southside Community Land Trust. They've been around for 40 years, an urban farming organization, nonprofit. They're in Providence and Cranston, and they're doing amazing work to helping people grow their own food, start their own businesses, and to actually sell to local farmers markets. So, I think there's really wonderful solutions that are happening. You asked, what are we doing? So a few years ago, one of the things that If Impact started was the Hunger Elimination Task Force. And so this has really brought together stakeholders across the state to try to hone in on some of the specific issues, like I just mentioned, right? Transportation, delivery, what have you. And I think we've made a lot of progress in engaging partners so that we can move forward with solutions, but it's challenging. And I think food insecurity is a really complicated issue because it's really not just about food. It's about so much more.
That fruit and the SNAP program you talked about is so important because, we highlight this just in our curriculum at a very basic level, that access to fresh fruits and vegetables is difficult on so many reasons other than just a price thing. So the transportation, super relevant. The fact that a cheeseburger at McDonald's costs way less than an apple from a farmer's stand, that's a problem. And I think that your role, it's almost it's two-sided. You have this great vision and you're identifying these big buckets of things that we know are concerns that feed into the 2030 vision, but you're also understanding that you're reactionary and you're just going to seize those opportunities. So I think that it's so well-rounded. I have a question. It's a little bit more of a projection. So if you can get out your crystal ball, I know that 2030 if you actually pulled a crystal ball in your person, that would have been fantastic. I know
Next time.
Let's say in a perfect world, we get to where we want to get to in achieving our goal for the New England vision as a whole, which again, Rhode Island's aligning for. When we get to 2030, what's waiting? What's the next issue that we haven't thought about? Or is it just, are we anticipating that we're not going to truly get there, or we're just going to have to continue to, it's kind of ominous, but is there hope?
Oh, I would love to know the answer to that, but I think you have to have hope in this space. And I'm an optimist, and I wouldn't be doing this if I wasn't an optimist and thinking that it's possible. I think there's a lot of things that we don't know. And I think we have to believe what is possible. I actually had the opportunity to listen to a talk by Frances Moore Lepay, the author of Diet for a Small Planet, which was written 50 years ago, actually this year. And she was talking about being more than just an optimist, being a possibilist, I think is what she said. And what we don't know, what we don't know. And I think we have to believe what is possible. Are we going to hit 30% local production and then say, okay, great, everything's done? Probably not, right? Because there's a real issue here around equity and access. So it's more than just production, but it's also about distribution and access to those products. I think you asked the question about like what's next. I think if we hit the 2030 mark, the 30% local sourcing, I think we will have made significant progress. But I think we need to look at more than just local, right? So there's a lot of labor issues in the food system, right? Workers are not paid enough. And in fact, farm workers and food producers, restaurant workers often are the ones experiencing, ironically, food insecurity themselves. So we need to kind of unpack some of these issues, I think. Local is something that people can understand, they can wrap their head around, but it's not the only solution, right? We're not going to stop drinking coffee and tea. We're not going to stop eating chocolate or bananas. So we need to think about, are there ways that we can support community food systems outside of the New England region, outside of the Northeast, for the products that we're going to continue to eat? There's also a lot that needs to happen with shifting diets, right? The average American, the average Rhode Islander still consumes far more animal products produced at a conventional scale than we could ever sustain within New England or the Northeast. And quite frankly, the world, right? We just can't sustain it. Rhode Island has amazing local seafood, right? What would it take to try to shift diets away from, what is it? 19 pounds. I think the average American eats like 19 pounds of chicken a year.
It's crazy.
Right? Like, what is it? 1 pound of fish. How do we, it's not saying don't eat chicken, but how do we shift a little bit to diversify our diets? We have this awesome organization in Rhode Island that works regionally called Eating with the Ecosystem. And they're focused on exactly that, right? Looking at, right now, something like red crab is becoming more available in our waters, but that might not be the case by 2030. So we can't always think that there's just this silver bullet, but we need to connect more with our food system and our food producers and understand what it is that's happening around us.
It kind of goes back so much to just education, which I know is part of what you do. And it's so hard to tell someone. You would think if anyone could make more seafood part of your diet, it's Rhode Island, because it's so just across everything we do. But it's so hard to tell someone, even in like the most educationally focused way, like you need to change your diet. People are like, screw you, I'm going to eat chicken. I just like this. It's so difficult. And it goes back to that word. And I think it's important that you said hope, because, not only is it on Rhode Island's flag, and I think it's our motto, it's inundated in everything you do, that like, while you have the best systems and the best policies, you just have to hope that the world takes those steps. And I think that you're doing the good fight. So please continue. Jamie wanted to ask you a fun question about restaurants, but before we do, not to just put her on the spot, but before we do, I just wanted, if someone listening wants to find out more information about the good work and the hope that you guys are putting out there, where can they go?
So they can go to relishroadie.com. That's probably the best place, and they can contact me and learn more about what we're doing. Another really important way to engage is to join the newsletter for the Rhode Island Food Policy Council. They work across the state, and they're doing amazing work. So it's a really great way to stay informed about what's happening.
And real fast, Jimmy. So, and also, Julie, you are helping plan the Rhode Island URI Food System Summit, correct? Can you talk a little bit about that real fast?
Yeah, definitely. So that's been happening for, I think, 7 years. University of Rhode Island hosts the annual Food System Summit, and they bring together stakeholders. So that's going to be happening in January. It happens in January every year, January 18th. And we'll be having some follow-on sessions as well on kind of different topics. But that's an awesome way to engage. And you should definitely show up to that.
Well, thank you. We will definitely put that on our calendars. And I want to thank you for all the education you provided us today. I think it was great information. I think it's a lot of things that we don't think about or know about. So first, I wanted to thank you for your time and sharing that. And second, my little fun question is we've been talking a lot about local and sustainability. So if you're not cooking, you're going out, are you going out? Are you getting takeout? And where are you going?
Oh my gosh. Well, I feel like I can't just choose one option because that would be unfavorable. But I I have to say, so I'm based at the Commerce Department, which is over in kind of Olneyville Valley area. So I tend to eat a lot around that area. And I'm lucky because the Farm Fresh Rhode Island headquarters is directly across the street. And they have all these awesome vendors in there like Anchor Toffee and Harvest Coffee. There's Lost Pizza and the brewery. So I'm really lucky because I can go there. And Tallulah's, I think, just opened there. So I tend to go over there and get my fix.
That's such a
great answer.
It's such a great. It's a very safe answer. Clearly, you've been working in politics, so the government side too long not to commit. But I appreciate that. It is a good opportunity to shout out to Farm Fresh because, I mean, it's just a huge hub of amazing resources. You mentioned Anchor Toffee. Peter Kelly used to be a faculty member at Johnson & Wales. Right. So much love for him and everyone else who's involved with them. It's just if you live in that area or you're able to, you should check it out. It's awesome.
Yeah. And we do love some Tallulah's tacos. So
That's true.
And they're doing really cool stuff with working with local farmers on getting corn into their tortillas and stuff. I just want to say, because I know a lot of students might be listening, and there are so many cool food system jobs happening in Rhode Island. Farm Fresh is one of them that's hiring for a lot of positions right now. We're actually hiring for a farm and sea to school coordinator that's going to work across the state on bringing together producers and buyers in the farm to school space. So, there's really cool stuff happening in Rhode Island. And I would just encourage your listeners to try to connect with the partners that are here in the state. And I'm always happy to be a resource. I'm always happy to have a 15-minute call with anyone about, anything related to food.
And if anyone is looking to get in touch with Julie, obviously her email is blasted all over state websites. But if you can't and you just know Jaime or me, reach out, we'll connect you. Julie, thank you so much for taking the time. I know you are beyond busy. So I want to say thank you and enjoy your weekend. And we'll talk to you soon.
Thanks so much. Happy Thanksgiving.
Oh, you too.